Hello everyone, my name is Alexandra Koncevich and I'm going to be doing chapter 6, which is about labor. So this chapter starts off with a case study on Dubai. Dubai depends on high-end tourism and retail for its economy. Its hotels, resorts, and shopping malls cater to a high-end market to such an extent that the name Dubai is synonymous with wealth and luxury. On the other hand, its population tells an entirely different story. In 2017, the city had about 3 million residents. However, less than 10% of these residents are actually citizens of the United Arab Emirates. While Dubai has about 250,000 citizens, 2.7 million people live there temporarily. Citizens of the United Arab Emirates tend to work for the government, while private sector jobs are held by migrants. A few of these are rich and famous who own property or have business interests in Dubai. A larger number are managers and professionals working in banking, manufacturing, and other sectors. However, the vast majority are laboring in construction, retail, and domestic service. So while Dubai is known for luxury, this luxury was built, maintained, and staffed by a migrant workforce. Migrant workers tend to come to Dubai mostly from India, but many also come from South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Gulf, Middle East, or Africa. While Dubai is outside the norm of its use of migrant labor, it's part of a global pattern. Migrant labor is becoming a normal part of countries' economies. Countries around the world seem to have similar themes of public rhetoric that blames migrants for all manner of economic problems. The first one is the idea that free flows of migrants are causing governments to lose control of their borders. This was the main argument for proponents of Brexit. However, border crossings by migrants is still very much controlled and regulated by the state, which in turn creates the conditions under which most migrants can move. The second one is migrants represent a drain on the economic resources of the host countries because of their claims on social welfare systems, unemployment benefits, and healthcare services. This actually depends on place-specific analysis. For example, in Sweden, generous welfare provisions and prohibitions on working mean that refugees do indeed draw significantly on the resources of the state. In Singapore, on the other hand, their migrant population have no access to the welfare benefits of being a citizen, so it has very little impact on state expenditures. The third one is migrants will take jobs from those who are locals in a particular place. This rhetoric intensified after the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008. This is a complicated argument due to the fact that it requires us to know whether those jobs would have existed without migrants willing to take them, and whether local residents would have been willing to take them in the absence of migrants. And the fourth one is migrants undercut local wages and working conditions because of their willingness to work for less. This does happen, but only in very specific ways. In the US, the impact tends to be on specific low-skilled jobs located in segments of the labor market where migrants are competing for work. In segments such as agriculture, retail, hospitality, construction, and caregiving, migrant workers do keep the wages down, but there is little impact on the earnings of the wider labor market. Labor markets are changing due to the increasing use of migrant employees. Some key changes are precarious employment, subcontracting and agency work, deepening inequality, automation and mechanization, expanding care work, and globalization of production. So where do migrants fit into this picture? If these trends represent the undermining of decent work, then being a migrant is one further form of depriving them of their rights as a worker. This is because migrants have fewer rights and expectations that they are the ones that have to put up with these new working conditions. The territorial power of the state means that labor migrants come in many varieties. The state can define who legally belongs within a given territory and can assign different rights to those with different degrees of belonging. Here are some migrant labor types, starting with the most privileged and moving onward to those with very few rights. So the one that is the most privileged is elite migrants. So they are on the higher end of the income distribution and at top levels of management in international firms. These individuals may hold assets such as homes and businesses in several countries and may structure their lives in order to avoid higher tax rates in certain places. Economic immigration programs have international migrants that are selected based on their credentials and skills according to the needs of the local labor market. The next one is skilled return migration. These are migrant workers who study, work, and live abroad and then return to their home country. Internal migrants are a little bit different. They are migrants across a macro-regional scale, such as the mobility of workers across member states of the EU. Temporary foreign workers are also known as contract workers or guest workers, and they are individuals permitted to work in a country where they do not have a permanent right to reside. They may face a threat of deportation, non-renewal, or blacklisting from future contracts if they engage in any activities of which their employer disapproves. Their visa is usually quite restrictive and allows them to work only for a specified employer at a specified job. Undocumented migrants are the bottom of the totem pole. This is the most marginalized among all migrant workers since they live and work without legal status. They are extremely vulnerable because they live under the constant threat of deportation. However, they are often essential participants in the labor force. What effect does migrant labor have on the places where they settle and the places they come from? In places where migrant workers are largely employed, they can have a significant impact on economic activity. First impact of migrant labor is that in some places, their availability allows certain kinds of production or economic activity that would not otherwise happen. This is due to the fact of the low cost and numerical flexibility that they provide to employers. For example, the agricultural sector. Production is possible simply because low-cost migrant labor is available. The second impact of migrant workers is the domestic sphere of reproductive labor, such as cooking, cleaning, and childcare. The International Labor Organization, or the ILO, estimates that there are 67 million domestic workers across the world and that 80% of them are women. 1 in 25 female workers worldwide is a domestic worker, and 1 in 5 domestic workers, which is over 13 million, is an international migrant. Because governments have no expanded child care or elder care services, this has created a demand for domestic workers to fulfill the home-based roles, such as child or elder care workers, au pairs, or domestic helpers. The third impact is the extent to which they can be controlled and disciplined because of their status in the host economy. Migrant workers are easier to control because in the case of undocumented workers, they're always vulnerable to being deported, and in the case of foreign worker programs, several aspects of their lives make them compliant and controllable. Labor migration has important impacts on the places where migrants come from. The most relevant economic dimension is the money sent back to family members by migrant workers, known as remittances. In 2000, global remittance inflows to all countries amounted to $116 billion. By 2017, it has increased to $613 billion. Of that, $457 billion was flowing to low and middle income countries. Some positive impacts of remittances are, on a national scale, they can fuel everyday consumption, finance new business, or provide capital to expand existing ones, and support the value of a country's currency. On a household scale, as direct support to the family, they are viewed as being immune to capture by corrupt practices or political agendas. In receiving countries, studies have shown direct improvements in quality of life among households that receive them, including infant mortality rates, life expectancy, and access to health services. On the other hand, remittances do raise some concerns. One problem is whether they generate productive activities that will sustain long-term livelihoods or just fund short-term consumption. They can lead to the loss of talent that could have been used in the home economy and often underused abroad. The opportunity to migrate is unevenly distributed. Remittances may actually increase income inequality in the sending communities. Lastly, remittances can have inflationary impacts on the costs of land, housing, schooling, and other everyday expenses in sending areas. During this part of the chapter, we'll be looking at ways in which workers collectively organize themselves within and sometimes resist the economic system in which they work. The traditional face of labor organizing has been the union. According to the table seen on the slide, you can see that the level of union membership is highly uneven across all the different countries. And in just 14 to 15 years, union membership has dropped dramatically in many of the countries, especially Argentina, Australia, and Germany. Trends such as subcontracting, globalizing production, and home-based work have all reduced the number of traditionally unionized jobs or made them harder to unionize. For migrant laborers, in many cases, it is simply illegal for them to join a union. But organizing can also be impeded by ethnic and linguistic differences and dispersed workplaces. New strategies have been developed in response. One of these strategies is community alliance building. This involves unions reaching out to other community groups in order to unionize and bargain for workers. The second one is social movement unionism. This is building campaigns for more generalized improvements in pay and working conditions that apply to all workers. And the third strategy is worker centers. These provide services for low-wage and precarious employees, especially where their status makes them vulnerable, such as temporary or undocumented migrants or recent immigrants. They provide advice, services, and advocacy that often goes well beyond workplace issues. Migration industry can be defined as an array of institutions that advise, recruit, regulate, train, transport, and connect migrants with employers. They usually involve the regulatory role of the state, but they also involve private entrepreneurs, personal social networks, and others. The right to legally move, settle, and work is controlled by the state. However, some countries, such as the Philippines, has established government agencies that they have developed into an extensive infrastructure to promote and regulate overseas work. The private sector is where most of the practical aspects of labor migration are administered. A dense network of private businesses are involved in the training, transportation, processing, and placement of workers. To prepare workers for overseas deployments, training institutions are needed. After they are trained, recruiters or brokers will link them with overseas employers. In addition, lawyers, legal advisors, and consultants who assist in securing the necessary documents and permissions are available to them as well. Financial companies are also a key part of the infrastructure as they facilitate the transfer of remittances, gifts, and belongings between countries. This is the end of Chapter 6. Thank you so much for listening. Bye!